About this time last year, I took a trip to Snowdonia in Wales just to try something different. You know, I shoot portraits and products, and I wanted to play around with another style of photography, so I tried out some landscape stuff. And when I posted the video from that trip and the photos, I had a lot of questions about how did you edit those shots together. So I'm going to share that with you today, but first let me show you a quick clip from that original video so you can understand the thinking behind those shots.
What I'm trying to do is, or this is what I'm thinking I'm trying to do anyway, and it's really a bit of an experiment for me, is I want to bracket my exposures, but I also want to stitch. And the reason for that is I'm trying to think, okay, I want as wide a shot as possible of this valley, and probably everywhere I'm going because I can crop in later. And I want as much information as I can get, both in dynamic range, but also in terms of megapixels in the image. So for every landscape shot I'm taking 9 shots. And best way to think of it is this. So you can see that I've got my camera set up in portrait orientation. And for every shots, there are 3 unique shots I want to take with each. And that's, so I'd start on the left, 1 shot, 2 shots, 3 shots. And as I stitch those 3 images together, I'm getting 3 times the amount of information, and I can basically blow this image up huge, obviously all those megapixels from those 3 shots all together. But for each of these 3 shots, I'm taking 3 shots within this as well, with bracketing. A lot of you know what that is, some of you won't. Bracketing is basically, I'm going to take one of those shots, say the first shot on the left there, 2 stops underexposed, 1 shot properly exposed, 1 shot 2 stops overexposed. And the reason for that is that I want as much latitude as I can in terms of the detail, from all the highlights to the shadows, from the brightest white on the cloud to the darkest shadow in the bushes at the bottom of the valley. So the way that you do that is, it's as the shot that's overexposed, as you bring it into Lightroom and you add it to the shot that's properly exposed, it's going to take all that shadow detail in the overexposed shot and add it to that middle shot. And the same for the underexposed shot. It's going to take all that cloud detail that might have got lost in the properly exposed shot and add it back in. And in Lightroom, it's the HDR function in Lightroom has come along quite a long way. And if you make sure you turn off the auto toning function, so you don't get that crazy HDR look, it just means that all that information is available to you in the edit as you start to pull the information back.
Now before I start, let me just say a quick word about HDR. I totally understand that it's the technique that photographers love to hate, but it is a legitimate technique, even if it's not your style. I mean, personally, I don't use it anymore. This was just an experiment I did a year ago. I don't use it in shots and haven't since. But for some people it is. I mean, I think of great photographers like Eli Locardi, like Trey Ratcliffe, who've used that as a legitimate technique in their landscape images and built successful careers off the back of it. Just because it's not your style doesn't mean it isn't interesting and valid for some people to use. The fact is that any camera still doesn't have the dynamic range that your eye has, and sometimes bracketing and combining those exposures in post is a great way to keep the details and the shadows and highlights that you want to include in your image. And hopefully the technique I'll show you today is a fairly sensitive way to use it, because what most of us are reacting to when we hear HDR is bad HDR. But if HDR isn't your thing, probably a good time to tune out. Okay, so let's jump into Lightroom. So here we are in Lightroom, and you can see what's happened is these are the 3 shots which have been bracketed. This is sort of a middling exposure, this is a darker exposure, and this is a lighter exposure. Shifted across a little bit to the center of this lake that I'm shooting. Here's a middling exposure, darker exposure, lighter exposure, and the same for the bottom. Shifted across to the right again, middling, dark, light. So you can see that I've got the 3 shots, and this will be combined to make one section of the final panorama. These 3 will be combined to make the middle section, this to be combined to make the right. So I'll start with, often easiest to do at the bottom here, is to just select the first image. So the first one there, move across the 3rd image, hit shift, and then right click, head up to photo merge, and head to HDR. Now what this will do is it will combine those 3 images into an HDR image, adding all the dynamic range, all the information from all 3 of those images. And you'll see HDR in Lightroom is pretty subtle if you leave off auto tone. So it's just moving along here, doing its thing. Okay, there we go. So here is the image. Now you can see it doesn't actually look that HDR-y in this image. If I put on auto tone, that's where it would look terrible. You can see that looks like the HDR that we all love to hate. If you turn this off though, all it's done is it's combined the information of the three into that image, but it's not really showing it, but it is accessible to you. So you can see this looks quite similar to that first middling image. So I'm going to go merge. Even though it doesn't look that different, the information is there for us to bring out. Okay, and there we go. What it's done is it's put it right at the end here, and this is our HDR image. You can see the little symbols at the bottom showing us, and it's labeled with the image number -HDR, and it's a DNG. So we know that this is our HDR image that we can access. We're going to do the same with the other 6. So I'm going to speed this up for you, but basically I'm going to hit that first one of the next series, going to hang along here to the third one and go shift click. So it's going to select all 3, go up to the top and merge and HDR again. So this will take a while, but you've seen how it works. I'm going to just do all 3 of these and I'll check back with you. Okay, so we've combined all those, and at the bottom here we've got our 3 HDR shots combined. This is the last 3 shots in our list here. So basically, just for time's sake, what I'm going to do is just start each of these 3 by selecting them one at a time and just hitting the 3 key. And then I can go over here, doesn't matter what you rate them as, to be honest, and then just select rated. So now I'm only looking at these 3 images. The trick now is what I want to do is get them, I want to bring all the detail out that I want at this stage, and I want to get them looking fairly similar to each other so that when we stitch them together, they're going to feel like an image together, part of a whole, as it were. So what I'll probably do is start with the middle one, just because this is the one that's sort of going to be the focus. Just double clicked on that image. I'm going to go over to the develop module, and just to show you how much is available. This doesn't look like an HDR image yet, but all 3 of those images are inside this image. So I have a lot to play with. So if I dial all the highlights down, all the whites down, all those are there, and all the shadows up and all the blacks up, that is all the image. All the tonal values are represented. It's managed to catch everything except maybe just that tip and point on the sun, which is totally understandable. So this is the bad HDR we hate. So we don't want this. So if we just reset all these to 0, okay, now I just want to go in and I want to pull back the detail that I want. So I do want some of those highlights there, not too much. When you start getting that haloing there, it starts to look quite fake. So let's leave something like that and maybe dial the whites back just a touch as well. So we've got that nice detail there, especially where the sun is. And then if we bring up the shadows just a touch, this is where we need to be careful. Somewhere around there for me is probably good. That feels fairly good to me. It's a bit warm for me. This was on an early morning and it was a snowy morning, so I wanted feeling a little cooler than this. This is my fault. I obviously screwed up the white balance. I'm just going to dial the white balance slightly to the left. So we're somewhere, in fact, just for ease, let's make this about 5,000-ish. What did I select here? If I make this about 5,000, I can do it for all of them, and then I know what am I doing? It doesn't want to let me do that. Okay, well, we're around 5,000 there. That sort of feels fairly good, and we're going to play with the colors later. In terms of the tint, I'm happy. I don't want to mess with that. Clarity, I always just put clarity to 10 just to give it a little kick. You have to be careful with clarity, and vibrancy probably 10 as well, just to add a bit of punch to it, but not too much. Saturation, I'm going to leave where it is. In my hue, saturation, luminance slider, this is a good one. I want to, with luminance selected here, I just want to bring back a lot of that sky detail. So if I dial my blues to the left, you can see what it does if I go crazy. But I don't want to do that. I just want to make it so that the clouds really pop. So yeah, maybe minus 15 there. It looks about right to me. And I might be able to do the same with the aquas a little bit as well. Just back them up a touch. And that looks fairly good to me. I'm going to leave the rest. Saturation, I don't want to mess with. Hue, I don't want to mess with. Okay, great. I'm going down, leaving sharpening where it is. Lens correction, just going to see what this will do is probably take out some of the vignette. If I go enable lens correction, it's going to straighten that out for me and just pull out some of that vignetting, which is going to help with the stitch as well. So I'm going to have lens profile correction enabled. Leave all that. Now that I've taken out that vignette, though, it is starting to look a little too HDR, so I'm going to back those shadows back down a little bit to keep the contrast. So once I've got that, basically what I want to do is go into my others here, and I want to try and match the same. So let's try here, 5,000. There we go. So I'm sort of in the ballpark of where I was. This image is looking brighter overall than the one next to it. So I'm going to bring the overall exposure down just a little bit. And the highlights are looking all right. I'm going to back them out just a touch so I can keep all the shadow, this cloud detail, highlights in the clouds, and bring those shadows up, just like I did on the other one, just a little bit. And that is looking, just clicking backwards and forwards, imagining them together. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to punch in 10 on clarity, 10 on vibrance as well, just to give that bit of pop. Bring down again luminance on the blues. I want to try and match everything up. So now I'm looking at the sky, clicking backwards and forwards. That's looking fairly good. Sharpening, leaving, and I want to enable lens correction. See what this does. Yep, that's great. And I like the shadows are good. Everything's good there. So I think those two now are matching pretty well. Yep, that looks good. And back to this first one here. Again, this is looking brighter than the initial image. So I'm going to bring it down the overall exposure just a little. Pull my exposure, my highlights way down on this one because I can see I'm losing that nice detail there. It's probably going to use this center piece here anyway, rather than this image, but just to sort of balance them out a little bit, that might be a little too much. I'm going to push it back up a touch. And then let's punch in 5,000 on my white balance just to keep everything the same. How are we doing? Is that looking fairly similar? Yep, that's looking pretty good. Pull up my shadows just a touch. Again, all this information is available to me if I want it because I've used the HDR, but I'm not going to go too far. Just maybe somewhere like that. Let's backwards and forwards and have a look where we are. That looks pretty good. Punch in 10 on clarity, 10 on vibrance. When I'm editing in Lightroom, I'm not editing for the final image. I'm editing to get a good canvas to Photoshop, to be honest. So that's how I'm thinking about it. I want as much detail as possible so I can tweak it in Photoshop because I've got more control. Back to luminance again. I'm going to pull my blues down just to create that bit of pop in the clouds and maybe the aqua a little bit again. So clicking to that middle, sky's looking, yeah, that's looking fairly good. Down again, enable profile correction. That's going to correct that distortion, and that looks pretty good. So if I'm clicking backwards and forwards here, yeah, that's looking pretty good. All right, so now I've got all three images looking fairly similar. If I head back to library and I click on my little grid view here, and I've got them side by side. Okay, this is looking too bright. Now that I put it side by side, it's looking a little too bright. So if I head up to the top here, back to the develop module, and I think what I want to do actually is just bring the shadows down a little bit. That's, I think, what's confusing my eye there. And if I'm backwards and forwards, that looks better now. All right, so now that I've got all three images looking similar to each other, I am going to, if I head back to the library, back to that grid view, they look pretty good now. I'm going to select the first image is selected here, and I'm going to hold shift and click on the last image, right click. Now I'm going to go to photo merge again, but this time I'm going to go to panorama. Now that I've worked to get all the detail and getting the look similar, getting to look similar to each other at least, I'm going to click on panorama, and this is going to create my panorama. It's going to look for those similarities between the borders, and it's a good idea, by the way, to make sure that you've got overlap when you're shooting one and then the other and then the other, that there are portions of the image that overlap with each other, at least sort of 25%. That way it's going to be very easy for it to pick those up in the image and stitch them together. Something that's worth noting with Lightroom, it's got a nice function here called boundary warp. These are just different modes that it can use to stitch it together. I tend to just stick with spherical. I find it's the best version, but you notice all this white space around it, and Lightroom's got this clever function where it'll stretch these edges to fill them out right up to the edges. It's not always a good idea just to stretch it the whole way because it can distort things a little bit, but some stretching so that you can get a better crop is often a good idea. So let's just put it to 50% in the middle. We've got some white space and we'll just crop that out. And if I hit merge now, it's going to just work for a second in the taskbar here, and it should create our final image. And here we go. So right here at the bottom now we have our final panorama. If we double click, open up, we can see that's image that's 3 HDRs all stitched together. So if we go to the develop module now, I'm going to click on this top left little icon here, which is our crop tool, and I'm just going to crop out all those unwanted areas. So I don't really want this wall here, it's not interesting. And probably what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to crop something like this, probably put the horizon line close to that lower third there. So there we go, that's looking good. It's not exactly on the horizon, but we've got this nice area of sun here, and because the rays are shooting this way, I don't need it centered. It looks quite good that way. So if I hit that little icon again, that's going to finalize that crop for me. And now I'm just looking over it once over, seeing how are we looking here, how's it faring, and I can still edit, obviously. I can pull this back a touch. It's looking fairly good. Highlights are looking, good where they are. I don't want them too fake, but I do want to sort of get a bit more dynamic range than my camera could manage. And that is pretty much where I want to be at this stage. I'm just going to go File, Export, and probably but the best for this, just to keep the information, is just to export a TIFF, and that'll sort of leave us with a nice bundle of information. So we're going to export this file, and then we'll bring it into Photoshop and start editing on it. Okay, so we've brought the image into Photoshop, and let's start having a go at editing this. And this is kind of where I'll spend most of my time with an image, to be honest, but I'll just run you through some of the basics of what I do, and not get into too much of the technical. The first thing I'll do is just create a blank layer above, and what I want to do is I want to go around and take out anything that's a distraction in the image. For you purists who don't like to move anything out of your landscape shots, this obviously isn't for you, but for me there's just particular things in here that I find annoying. These poles, pylons, I find a little bit of a distraction, so I want to get rid of those. So what I'll probably do is use the clone tool, and I'm going to head in, and I'm just going to use areas of similar interest. I'm going to select the clone tool here. I want to make sure my edges are feathered, so you're not going to see those hard edges. So my hardness is set to 0. I'm going to hold Alt and click on areas I want to clone from, and I'm just going to clone out some of these distractions here. Let's use this area here. This is really going to be by feel. Sometimes it's quite tricky to find areas that are going to work, and you obviously don't want to be able to see duplications either, so you need to work your way around a little bit. But obviously if I turn this on and off, you can see that's where that pylon was there. You can see it looking a little fuzzy because you know to look for it, but if you're looking at this at full res, you're never going to notice that. So for as much time as you want to take, you can obviously be more accurate with this kind of thing as well, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm not going to spend a crazy amount of time. I'm just going to work my way around, and I'm going to take out the most distracting elements in this image. It's going to take a few minutes, so I'm going to speed this section up. Okay, that looks pretty good. I've taken out some of these distracting poles here, which is bugging me. I was thinking about this road, but I kind of like the roads there. There was a little kind of car in the corner here, which I took out as well. So you can see all I've done is just remove these poles here if I turn this layer on and off. Very subtle, but it just gets rid of it, and it was kind of bugging me. So the next thing I want to do is I want to sharpen, but I want to sort of selectively sharpen. So if I go Command-Alt-Shift-E or Control-Alt-Shift-E on a Windows computer, I create what's called a stamp visible layer, which is everything underneath just stamp visible on top of everything as its own layer. If I then head up to Filter, this is how I just choose to sharpen. If I go down to Other and go to High Pass, what High Pass does is it creates this sort of strange grayscale sort of layer where you can sort of see everything very faintly laid out in kind of a crunchy, its own kind of grayed out layer. What you want to do is you want to dial your radius. If you push your radius up here, I'll show you what happens. You get this horrible kind of haloing effect. You want to avoid that. So basically, you only want a few pixels big, just enough so you can see these kind of sharp edges here, but you don't want that sort of crazy haloing. So if I put it here to about 1.4, I like that. I'm going to go OK. And then I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to overlay, or soft light is good as well, but I think I want overlay. It gives a bit more strength to that effect. Now if I turn this on and off, you're not going to be able to see this here, Maybe if I zoom right in, you can kind of see what it's doing. This is off and that's on. So it's sort of sharpening and crispening up those edges. At the moment, it's applied to the whole image, and I don't want that. What I want is just to be able to paint it on particular areas. So if I hit this layer mask icon here, I add a mask to this layer. If I go Command or Control I, it's going to turn the layer to black. And on a mask, as we know, if your black is to hide and white is to reveal. So at the moment, everything's hidden. So this whole sharpening effect is hidden over the whole image. If I go to my brush tool here, I'm going to keep it on 100% because I want it applied where I want it applied. If I change my brush tool to white and just dial it up here, my edge is very soft again on 0% hardness. And I'm going to just paint in where I want things to appear sharper. So I want these clouds to look quite sharp and punchy. So I'm just painting in sort of this area here and these rays here. I want this, and some of these clouds here to sharpen these up a little bit, and up the top. So I want that section. I don't want to, you can see it sort of appearing here on this white, on the mask here, and the black, everything else is hidden. I don't want to sharpen up any of these hills because they're already very busy and quite cluttered. But maybe what I want to do is just sharpen some of this water down here where the light is being cast. So I'm just selectively adding sort of sharper areas to this image where I want you to focus, which is in this center kind of oval here. You can see these kind of squiggly shapes I've made here. If I hit backslash, you can see what I've painted. Everything that's red here shows you where the mask is unaffected or unused, and everything that's clear, you can see this is where I painted in that mask to sharpen things up. So hit backslash again to hide that. Now what I want to do, and this is what I probably spend the most of my time on, is I want to dodge and burn. Now this is going to highlight and accentuate different areas of the images by making them brighter and darker. And before you go like, well, that's not very purist. I mean, guys like Ansel Adams were doing this with their film photographs way before Photoshop was a thought in anyone's mind. And he in particular would go through 30, 40 versions of chemically dodging and burning his negatives before he came out with an image that he actually liked and printed. So this is, again, absolutely a legitimate technique. There are a bunch of ways to do this. You can create a gray layer and paint in some white and some dark on that layer. On that 50% gray layer, you can change the blending modes. You can just create a curves layer and pull your curves brighter or dark and then paint that in. The way I choose to do it is also with a curves layer. But if you select your curves and then you go to your blending mode, and let's start with the dodging layer, which is to create things and sort of make them brighter. I'm going to push this curves layer and create screen. So as soon as you select screen as a blending mode on curves, it has this effect of brightening everything up. Now again, I'm going to go Command I to invert this mask and turn it off basically. And then I'm going to come back to my brush tool. This time I'm going to select my flow to 3%, which means I'm going to slowly paint in this effect. It's not just going to appear when I paint it. And then I'm going to slowly paint in on areas I want brighter. So let's start with this hillside here. With my brush, I want this snow to look brighter. So with it selected to white and with my mask selected on here, I'm just going to start to paint in the areas where this snow is. At the moment, it's looking a bit dirty, and I really want to kind of brighten up this snow here. So here we go. This will obviously take a little while. So I'm going to speed it up, but I hope just for now you can kind of see what it's doing. If I turn this on and off, can you see that? It's just brightening up the areas I want it to brighten up. So I'm going to speed this up just to save a bit of time. Okay, so just to show you the basics of what I've done here, just going to hit a little bit more of these clouds. I'm going to turn this layer on and off so you can see. But basically, I've just worked on that snow on the hills. Can you see that? Just brightening up those areas that I want to sort of make pop a little bit more. So some of these reflections down the bottom, and also just in these hills here, I want this to sort of pop a little bit more as well. A little tip on this. It's often not very productive to zoom right in and do this. Sometimes it's better to stay out a little bit so that you can kind of see what you're doing and what the overall effect is. You can sometimes get too close to your work and create mistakes. Just on these clouds here as well, it's kind of nice to where they're already lit up underneath, and you can see that you've got the space to do this. Like, make sure you're not overexposing stuff. But if you're way off overexposing, you can just kind of round out the areas where the sun's hitting the bottom of those clouds as well. So if I turn this is my dodge layer, and just you can see just making some of those areas pop. Same again, I'm going to create a curves layer for my burn layer, and I'm going to change the curves layer to multiply. See, it's going to darken down the entire image, keeping all the detail. I'm going to hit Command I, Command I is going to turn that layer to black and hide everything. And then I am going to make sure my brush is white, flow 3% again, because I slowly want to paint this in. And now I'm going to go to areas which I want to darken or take out some of that detail. And really on this one, I think I only want to sort of bring some drama to the clouds. So anytime where the clouds are looking darker and I want to create a bit more shape where they're looking dark, or where there's some shadow under some cloud, and I can sort of make them appear a little more moody. So this is really by feel. I'm sure people do this properly and are much more technical than I am with it. This is just me being quite quick with it, but you get the idea. So you can see, just to create a bit more shape and mood in that cloud, and you can be quite strategic about how you do it as well. I like to sort of darken out the edges a little bit as well, just so we're not sort of bleeding light off the edges. And if I just turn, maybe I can pull back some of this blue as well in areas, just maybe there as well. Okay, now if I turn this layer on and off, you can see what I've done. Just sort of add a little bit of drama to those clouds there. Okay, now I just want to work a little bit on the light. This is kind of the overall light. So I'm going to create a curves layer. Because the sunlight is probably going to be a little bit more yellowy, a little bit warmer than the rest of the scene, I'm going to, on this curves layer, I'm just going to push up my mids a little bit, first of all. So let's try, oh gee, there, somewhere there. Yep, like that. And then if I go into my red channel, I'm going to push my reds up a little bit, just a little bit. And then on my blue channel, I'm going to pull them down a little bit, which is going to introduce a bit of yellow. So this is hopefully going to create a bit of warm light. So if I, again, Control or Command I, turns that all off so we don't have to worry about it. Now, with my mask selected and my brush at 0% hardness and 3% flow, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start to accentuate. I mean, what makes this photo for me is some of these light rays look really cool. So as I paint these in now, you're going to see what it should do is just accentuate, bring in more light into those rays. And while I'm bringing in light, because I've selected, also, brought in some yellow and some reds in there as well, it should just accentuate the light in there as well. So if I'm sort of painting this down here, I should just be adding some nice warm light. So if I turn this on and off, can you see? Just sort of made those rays pop a little bit. And on top of this layer, that's sort of some of the fine detail. What I can do is just to create a little bit of a glow, make a really big brush, and then just sort of smudge it over the center a little bit there. It's going to take a second because it's a big file to register, but just to create a nice little bit of warm light in the middle there. And then just to create maybe a path between those two, just light brushes in here as well, just to bring some of that light through. I mean, with landscape images, as much as anything else, your eye is going to go to the brightest part of that image always. So you're just kind of leading your viewer to look at what you want them to look at. So if I turn this layer on and off, you can see what we've done is we've just created a little bit more light in this center, like sort of emanating from that sun. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to bring it down in opacity just a touch to maybe 65%. Looks a little bit hectic. So if I hold Alt, just so we can see what we've done, if I hold Alt and press the little eye icon next to our background, you can see what we've done already, just to sort of make things pop a little bit more. Now, just to sort of round it out, this is a very quick edit. I probably spend a lot longer on this than I am now, but just to show you some quick techniques, I might go to, let's start with color balance. So with color balance, I like to use a little bit of basic color theory. I don't want to create contrast at this point, but I do want to bring in some sort of visual contrast. I can do that with colors by pulling in opposite colors into different tonal values. So let me start with shadows, and this is a very basic formula I use every time. I go kind of +3 on blue and -3 on cyan. So this is going to make my shadows a lot cooler. Then I'm going to go to midtones. I'm going to go -3 on yellows and +3 on reds. So now I'm making my midtones warmer, and my highlights, I'm going to do the same, +3. Oops, no, it's adding blue. So -3 on yellows and +3 on reds. So what I've done effectively is I've made my shadows cooler, my highlights warmer. I haven't lost any detail, but I have created a bit of color contrast. So if I turn this on and off as a layer, can you see what it's doing? It's warming out those highlights. It's also creating a little bit of visual contrast as well without actually throwing detail away. And then let's go to my hue saturation. This is a great thing for just being able to isolate different colors and choose what you want to do with them. So we ignore my master for now. Let's go to my yellows. And this is going to be a bit of playing around. I'm just going to play with the hue a little bit and see what that does. I feel like it's got a little too much sort of green in the yellows. So just by dialing that to the left a little bit with my yellows, I'm watching my highlights particularly. I kind of like what it's doing there. And if I pull brightness up, it's kind of losing it a little, and I like that, and I'm maybe just boost the saturation a touch. Let's go down to my blues. This is like a very dominant color in different areas as well. I'm not gonna saturate anymore, I don't think. +2 doesn't matter, and then maybe bring them down a little bit in lightness so I can sort of just a little bit, and then pull back that saturation, maybe bump it a little bit just to compensate. So if you see what I've done with this hue saturation layer, very subtle, I've just sort of shifted those colors a little bit. And we're kind of looking okay. We're not looking too heavy HDR, but we've got a nice lot of detail in there. Maybe just to finish off, just a curves layer on top. And maybe I want to just create a basic S-curve, carefully watching. My shadows are already quite crunched, so I don't want to pull them down really. Maybe I just want to bump up those highlights a little bit, and then maybe I want to clip my shadows just a little bit, just because they're looking quite heavy, and because in this photograph they're quite busy. Again, I'm not a landscape photographer, but I just want to make sure that then, you know, it's all not getting lost in this clutter of, you know, black rocks. And then just to touch that off on the top, maybe create a levels layer. And a good trick to see how you're doing with your exposure here is to hold down Alt. And then if I take my highlights here, as soon as I click on it, you can see there it's going to give me a visual representation of where I'm overexposed. And you know, red is starting to get overexposed, yellow is close, and white is totally blown out. So if I pull this to the left, you can see it's showing me where I'm very overexposed and blown out. If I let go of that now, you can see I'm totally blown out. So if I pull this all back, it's just a way to pull in contrast, but just to monitor where I'm losing exposure. I don't mind losing a little bit of whites in there. I don't want to lose too much. So if I leave that there, that looks pretty good to me. And now if I do the same with my blacks, if I hold Alt again and touch my shadow slider here, you can see I'm safe. As I'm dragging it across, there you go. I'm starting to lose shadow detail in those areas when I get to this point, and the histogram shows you that visually above as well. So if I pull this to sort of here, I don't want them to be totally black, but I do want it pretty close. Let's take it to 5. I don't want to blow those out. Now I can take my midtones and I can maybe just bump those around till I like, or leave it right about there. I think I don't want to play with it any more than that. What I might do to this as well is just add, because it's looking a little cool in places, maybe I'll just add a photo filter on top. I've got my warming filter on, which I'm actually going to leave. That's absolutely fine. But instead of just leaving it like this so it applies to the whole image, I just want it applying to the highlights. And the way to do that is to, with the mask selected, quick trick, just go to Image and head down to Apply Image. And what that does is it creates a grayscale version. Just leave all these settings, merge RGB, multiply and 100%. Okay. What this is going to do is it's going to create a black and white version of the photograph on the actual mask, which means that everything that's white on this image, the lighter parts, are going to be revealed and black is going to be hidden. So this means effectively that it's only applying this warming filter to the actual highlights rather than the shadows. If I turn this on and off, you can see just warming up those highlights. A bit too strong for me, so I'm just going to take the opacity back down and I'm going to bump it up to 50%. Looks about right. And I think that now is looking fairly good. If I turn that on and off, from where we were when we brought it from Lightroom to now where we are, I think that's looking pretty good.